How many times have you had an idea, something you actually wanted to do, something that excited you, and then immediately your brain went, but I don't have the experience for that, or I'm not ready yet, or I should probably wait until I know more about this topic or this thing I want to work on. I'm guessing that that's probably more than once, and that's happened to me many times, usually anytime I'm about to start or embark on something new. And here's what I've noticed about young men. This applies to young women as well, but young men especially, you're looking for permission. You're waiting for some invisible checkpoint where you finally feel ready, and then you'll move on that thing. Sometimes you're waiting for a mentor or a parent or a peer to give you the okay, or this is a good idea. That's why we oftentimes go to a lot of other people. And I'm going to tell you something that might sound a little harsh, but it's honestly, I think the most honest thing I can say. That checkpoint doesn't exist. And the longer you wait for it, the more life is going to pass you by and you're going to be unhappy with where you're at. The truth is the guys who are actually out there winning in business, in relationships, in their craft, whatever it is, they figured out something early that separates them from everyone else. They understand that belief in your ability comes before the experience, not after, but before. And I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive because we're trained to think that you need to go to school or you need to have that experience. You need to have the credentials before you can really get started and do something. And, I think you're thinking, Matt, that doesn't make sense. How can I believe in something I haven't proven yet? We're wired mentally to prove things, then believe in them. But that exact question is what keeps you stuck. And here's what I mean. There's something that I like to call the naivety of success. And let me tell you what I've observed over, the 10 years of coaching athletes, building businesses, working with different entrepreneurs, and doing this podcast and talking to a lot of people who've had great success. And every single person who's done something significant, and I'm talking building a business, really growing it from the ground up or becoming really good at their craft, an athlete, not just something where they posted something or whatever, right? There's a thread, there's a thing that kind of runs through all of them. They had a moment early on where they made a decision about themselves that didn't match their current circumstances. They made an internal decision. They didn't have the credentials usually. They didn't have the experience. They definitely didn't have proof. And even if they did have some schooling or background, they didn't really know what they were doing when they started into this new thing. But they decided that they were going to be the kind of person who could do the thing. And then they moved like it was true. They made the internal decision that regardless of their experience or regardless of what they were trained to do, maybe they went to school for it, they were going to be the person they wanted to be. Tony Robbins talks about this. He says the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions you ask yourself. And most people are asking the wrong questions. They're asking, what if I fail? Or what if I'm not good enough? You're asking the question, what if I fail? Or what if I'm not good enough? Instead of what would I attempt if I knew I couldn't fail? It's a powerful difference. Totally different question. How many of us are approaching life and our journey and our experiences? How many of us are approaching it with the mindset of other people involved, and with the mindset of worrying what other people's opinions are, with the mindset of trying to find all the things that won't work about the equation and what you want to work on? And what if we were really looking at it about if I could just never fail, if success was the only option, what would I really do? I think we would completely change the things we work on. Because there's a lot of things that we fear of failure, and we fear the loss, and we fear that we're not going to be able to accomplish it, so we don't even try, right? Because we as people inherently don't want to fail. And I think that's a deep-rooted thing going back to being, our ancient ancestors. It's just deep-rooted. You don't want to fail because back, if you're a caveman, failure means death, right? Failure means you've gotten eaten by some predator. Failure means, you didn't kill that animal to provide for your family. That's what failure meant. But we don't live in that time anymore. So it's really rewiring these false beliefs we have that if we fail, it's end of the world. It's not. 9 times out of 10, it's not. So, but here's the thing about the second question. It's not actually about removing the risk, okay? It's about shifting your belief about what's possible for you. And that's what we're talking about. It's changing the wiring. It's changing the way you look at the equation. Because the moment you shift that, everything is going to change. Your decisions change, your body language changes, the opportunities you notice change. That's right. There's probably so many windows being open to you, so many opportunities, so many doors that you could walk down and change your life. But if you're not in the right headspace or mindset, because you're looking at from a sense of failure or a sense of how do I never fail, then you're going to choose the secure route. And the secure route, the comfortable route, says to stay right where you are. And so you're probably overlooking opportunities that are right in your path. as I've talked about, I mentioned this right at the beginning, there's a naivety, I'm not saying that right, but naivety to success, being naive. And I think it gets underestimated. Successful people, especially early on, they're not getting hung up on all the little details that would paralyze a more experienced person. And experience meaning you have some life under your belt that tells you not to go this way or not to go that way, that tells you, oh, this is going to be a lot harder than I expected. You've had experiences where you've been hurt, you've failed, you've been mistreated. And so it makes you cautious to move forward. And that's why you see a lot of people who, even later in life, who are still successful, they kind of roll with the punches. They realize that these hangups aren't failures. They're just parts of life. It's part of the journey, and you're going to experience that. But they don't take it personally, right? Because taking it personally holds you back. It makes you cautious. It makes you not do the right things. And that's not saying that when you've had a bad experience, keep doing the same things, the same mistakes that led to it. Be smarter. Use that experience for wisdom, but don't let it hold you back from trying. And it reminds me when I was 18 straight coming out of high school, you talk about relationships and marriage and that being on the equation and being a part of your life. And I remember coming straight out of high school thinking, man, I could get married today. Relationships are easy. There's nothing I couldn't handle. And that was the being naive to relationships. I hadn't really had a ton of relationships. I only knew my high school world. And once I got into the dating scene and got into, the college age scene and meeting people, experiencing what it's like to go out into the real world and get a job, get a career, try to make money, try to provide, buy a house, you realize quickly, wow, there's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot more to this growing up thing and becoming an adult than I thought when I was in high school. And I thought, oh man, this is why do people complain about adulthood? This is easy. And so the being naive led me to think that I could accomplish the world, that this thing called marriage or this relationships was a piece of cake and nothing could stop me. And that's a pretty invincible feeling. And I think that invincibility, you have to taper it, right? You have to kind of control it a little bit, but it can take you places you never thought possible because you have the mindset that you can do whatever you put your mind to. And that's what I'm really hinting at. I'm not saying at 18 I should have gotten married. Definitely shouldn't have. There was a lot of things I didn't understand about the world. I still don't understand about the world, even to this day, but I wasn't necessarily ready for that. And as I aged, I realized that. And truthfully, relationships and marriage became a more scary thought because I had had experiences that taught me and removed that naivety from me. But use that to your advantage. Use that lack of overthinking to your advantage. So here's the science. I want to break it down. This isn't really just a mindset. This is actual neuroscience backing this up. Some of these thoughts you could think, Matt, you're just coming top of the dome. You're just thinking off your head. These aren't real. Back them up, right? Well, your brain has something called the Reticular Activating System, the RAS, and it's a filter. Right now, your brain is processing millions of pieces of information per second. Everything I'm saying, what you're seeing on the screen, the text, the context, and you can't consciously handle all of that. So your RAS decides what gets through to your conscious awareness. And here's where it gets really interesting. Your RAS filters based on what you believe to be true about yourself and your world. So if you believe I'm not ready for that opportunity, your RAS literally filters out the signals that would help you see you are ready. If you believe I don't have what it takes, your brain stops noticing the evidence that contradicts that. It's not that the opportunities aren't there, it's that you're not wired to see them, because you're literally not thinking about them. It's the same reason you can go into a conversation with someone and make a statement and say something that to you doesn't seem rude or offensive in any way, right? You're just kind of stating a fact, an observation. Maybe, I'll give you an example. I was having a conversation with a friend and we were talking about their dating life and relationships. And I made the point to them and I said, hey, the truth is I think you're not having as much success in this area of your life because you're not meeting a lot of people. You're not in a social scene right now. You're staying at home more. You're focused on your career and you're not spending a lot of time around other people. Well, that person that I was speaking to was already a little bit worried and frustrated by their lack of social interactions, right? And so because they were already thinking about in their mind consciously, they're thinking, I suck at relationships. Nobody likes me. I'm a terrible person. They already had those thoughts in their mind. That's what they heard when I said to them, I think the reason is you're not in these social circles. That's why you're not getting to meet a lot of people. And to us on this podcast, you'd think, oh, well, that totally makes sense. It's just logical. Well, to the person who was listening to me, they took it offensively because they already had those belief systems in their mind, and that's what they were looking for. So our mind, if you're not in the right headspace, is going to find the things to prove the fact. It's going to go and try and prove the thing you already think about, and find things in the world that back up that belief. And that's what's so dangerous about social media at times, TikTok, Instagram, all these news outlets. We see the world through the perspective we want to see it through. And if we have all these, biased opinions filtering and coming through our screen, that's what we're going to see the world as. That's what we're going to believe the world looks like. So you have to be careful about what your mind already believes and what you're feeding your brain and understanding. But the truth is you can shift it, right? That's the best part. And you can shift that belief. If you genuinely decide you're the kind of person who figures things out, your RAS starts lighting up differently, right? You start seeing things differently. You start noticing connections, resources, people, information. When you start changing the equation and you start changing the way you look at the world and you think, you start seeing all these opportunities available to you. You no longer look at your friend that you made, that connection you made 10 years ago as just some random guy. You start seeing as, oh, this is a networking opportunity. You start seeing all these things that you may have seen as worthless encounters as real connection. And sometimes we think that's just coincidence, but truthfully, that's just your neuroscience. And you have to realize your brain is a powerful tool, but you have to use it properly. Now, I'm going to tell you the trap. I see a lot of young men, young women as well, but once again, kind of focusing this towards young men, fall into constantly, and it's the experience trap. And I talked about this a little bit early at the beginning, but you think, I need more experience before I can be confident. So you wait. You prepare, you take courses, you read books, you go to school, you network with people who have more experience than you, and that's all great. And that all has value. And I would say keep doing that. I encourage that. That's important. You should be making those connections. But here's what happens. The more you do those things instead of actually doing the thing, the more you cement the belief that you're not ready, because you're literally telling yourself every single day, I'm still preparing. I'm still getting ready. I'm not there yet. I'm doing all the things to build up to when I'll be able to do this thing. I had an interesting conversation with Chaim Zuniga. He came on the podcast just a few weeks back. Great guest. He's in the Army, and he's going to become an Army chaplain. And he brought up the point that I asked him what was the most important piece of advice he'd give his younger self if he could go back. And he pointed out the ability to focus and really dial in on what he wanted rather than wasting his time. And I thought that was a good thought, but he gave a little more context. And I think it's touching on this, that while during those years, his younger self years, he was reading a lot of good things and, spending his time educating his mind, he didn't really, it was, in his opinion, pointless because he was just filling the void of indecision. He wasn't choosing what he was really going to focus on. He wasn't really diving in and doing anything and accomplishing anything. He just was filling his mind in this preparatory state because he was actually nervous to make the decision. And so to not overthink and worry about himself and overthink all these things about himself, he was filling it with just constant noise, right? Reading books, listening to podcasts, watching that YouTube video, taking this course, going to school. And at some point he realized, I got to make the choice and realize I'm ready. I need to dive in, and then I'll learn all the things I need to accomplish that task. And so I think that's a powerful thing to reflect on and realize your subconscious is listening. It's filling that away. Not ready, not ready, not ready. And that's what you're hearing. That's what you're telling yourself. So if you're not careful, you can end up in this loop where experience is always almost enough. But it's never quite what you need. It's never quite there. And the truth is the guys who just start, who say, I don't know everything, and they admit that, which is really, truthfully, that is I've always said the most secure thing someone can do is say, I don't know. Sometimes we're so determined to look like we have it all together, to look like we know what's going on, to look like we don't have any questions about life, that we actually put off this air that we've got it together because we're so insecure about it. And the truth is the most secure thing is realizing I don't have all the answers. Nobody does. And I'm looking for them. And that's where you start to learn. That's where you start to grow. So those guys who say they don't know everything, but they're just going to start anyways, they're going to get involved. They're going to start building that business or start that college path. You could still do college, but you make a decision, right? They're the ones getting the real experience because they have something to apply it to. That's the stuff that actually builds confidence, because confidence, in my opinion, doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from doing things and finding out you can handle it. So here's the thing I want you to understand really at the deepest level. Belief creates capability, not the other way around. The person who believes they can figure out a problem will approach it differently than the person who believes they can't. It's the same problem, but a different belief and completely different outcome. I see this a lot when I'm coaching athletes. I'll have a player who believes or who has all the physical looks, the speed, the strength, the basketball IQ, but they don't really believe in themselves in that moment. And they play scared, they miss shots they normally make under the pressure, whatever you want to call it. And really what happens is they overthink, they hesitate, and they really pull themselves out of this flow state. We talk about the flow state all the time when it comes to athletics, which is just reactive playing, because they're overthinking it and they're worrying about all these external factors. The truth is, then I'll have a player on the opposite side who might not be as talented on paper, right? They're not necessarily as tall or athletic or explosive, whatever you want to say, but they believe they're going to make the play, right? They go in there with that mindset. They step up, they take the shot, they make the pass, they perform. And it's all, once again, reactive. And it's not because they suddenly got better at basketball. It's because they changed what they believe about themselves and their body responded to that belief. And especially in basketball, that's the sport I like to coach. We talk about all the time how sports and basketball specifically is, 90% mental. And I really think that's true. I've had a lot of athletes. I had, a couple players on my team who specifically very talented, very gifted, but when they would get in their head and you could tell, I was coaching women's basketball at the time. And this was very applicable. They would have days where you could tell they came into practice, they came into a game where they were locked in, they believed in their abilities, maybe they were having a good day. I don't know the specifics, right? It seems like, especially at that level, it was kind of that mid-high school level. And there's a lot of external factors. Maybe the boy they liked didn't talk to them, and so they got a little bit nervous about that. Maybe they fought with one of their friends. So there were so many aspects and so many little things that could affect the mentality of the players. And you could tell, you could see it so easily. They would play great in practice, or they would have a great practice the day before, and then they'd come in and it was like they were a completely different player. And it really is because of where their mindset was at and where their belief system was at. And at that age, there's so many different beliefs and ideas and external factors, and their minds are still forming, right? You're still forming ideas about who you are, what you can do. And so it's really a time where that can shift all over the place. But if you believe you can accomplish something, really believe it, not just say it to yourself, and you move different, you talk different, you take different actions, and then those actions will compound. So I saw this all the time with people I worked with, athletes I worked with, where we would be practicing shooting drills. If they would miss, you start in one spot, if they'd miss a couple times, we would try to shake it off. I might have them move to a different spot on the court, because what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to compound the idea that they would miss that shot, or compound the idea that they don't know how to shoot. Because when you miss a few times, you start to overthink it. You start to think about all the different things you're doing wrong. Why this? Why that? Did I mess up my hand, my placement, did I not jump properly? And when you start to overthink it, you start to mess with your form, and you start to believe that you don't know how to take that shot. And a lot of times it's just you didn't mentally get there, and so you need to get back on track. So we would shift gears, we would break the pattern, right? Break the loop, have them move to a different spot on the court, shoot there. They'd make a few shots in that new position because it reset the mind. And then we'd have them go back to that spot that was tough, because they now had broken the script and saw that they had made a few shots. They had the confidence back in their form and their shot, seeing that it worked, that it wasn't just that one, that it wasn't that their form was bad, but it was just that one specific spot. And they'd go back and perform just fine. And so doing things like that to break the loop mentally, when you start to get back in the pattern of not believing in yourself or overthinking, are really good tricks, even outside of basketball or sports. It's really good tricks, even as a person, to break that loop, change it up, stop the belief, and then come back to it later on when you have a better mindset. And that's just one of the ways you can stop yourself from getting and compounding that belief system that really is detrimental. So here's where I'm going to direct you to, okay? There's a decision you need to make, not someday, right now. Are you going to be the person who waits until they feel ready? That's really what this whole podcast has been about. Are you going to be someone who collects degrees and certifications and experience until some magical moment that the fear disappears and you feel confident and you feel like you're enough to move forward? Or are you going to flip the script and going to be the person who says, I don't have all the answers, but here's the big key, but I believe in my ability to figure it out, and I'm going to start now. That's the big confidence switch, believing that you have the ability. If you apply yourself, you focus, you give it your all, that you can do it. And if you have that, you can have all the confidence in the world. Those are actually the two paths you have to decide. And they will lead you to live completely different lives if you choose one versus the other. The first path, waiting for readiness, that's the path, in my opinion, that leads to regret. That's the path where you look back 50 years from now and you're not really content because you didn't try the things that really excited you. And personally, you could have done maybe something a little bit bigger. And some people luck out. Sometimes they get somebody who shows them a way and leads them down that path and gives them that permission to start. And that's great. I'm happy for those people, but that's not very often. Most people don't luck out on that. The second path, moving despite not being ready, that's the path of growth. That's the one where you build your confidence. That's one that you realize you have what it takes to get where you want to go, and you start to see the growth. And in my opinion, happiness comes from seeing progress. That's where happiness comes from. So when you're not happy, it's probably because you feel like you're not progressing. It's probably because you feel like you've been locked back or held back. People who are finding progress and feeling like they're growing tend to be happy. And here's the beautiful part. Once you start down the second path, it gets easier, because every time you do something that you weren't sure you could do, and then you believe in your ability and you actually do it, your belief in yourself grows. That confidence is like a flame. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Your RAS, as we talked about, starts filtering for evidence that you're capable. It starts looking for the things that compound the good belief. And you start seeing opportunities everywhere because you're vibrating at a frequency. I know that vibration term gets a lot of hate, but you're vibrating at a frequency. You have the right mindset that matches those opportunities. And people pick up on that. People see that. They are drawn to it. So just to recap, I want you to know I'm not saying experience doesn't matter. Of course it matters. The more you do something, the better you get at it. That's just how skills work. Athletes, when they go into the gym, if you've never shot a basketball before, you're not going to be very good at it. You can't just believe your way into shooting a basketball. But if you've put in the work and then you have that belief, it makes all the difference. Here's the distinction. Experience is a result of belief, not the prerequisite for it. You believe you can do something, you start, you get the experience. That's key. Do the action. The experience builds the actual skill, and your skill confirms that belief. So that's the process. And then you're actually confident in it, not because you're pretending, but because you've earned it. And it all starts with that belief. Without that, you never take the first step. You never have that belief in yourself to go and do. And without that first step, you never get the experience that would actually build the confidence you need to take and move forward. So the question I want to ask you guys is, it's not about, do I have enough experience? The question is, do I believe in my ability to learn and figure things out? Do I believe in myself that I can go and do that? Because if you believe in that, if you genuinely believe that about yourself, that you can, if you apply yourself, you can make it happen, then you can do anything. Not because you know how to do it, but because you know you can figure it out. You know you can put the pieces together. I want you to think about that something for a second before we close. What's one thing you've been telling yourself you're not ready for? I just want you to think about it real quick. What's a dream? What's a goal? Something that you know you've been fighting against. Something you actually want to do, but you've been waiting for the right moment or the person to tell you that this is the right time. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to make that decision, not to do the thing yet. Just decide about yourself. Decide that you're the kind of person who can figure things out. Decide that you don't need permission from your circumstances or from anybody specific to believe in yourself. Because once you make that decision, and you really make it, you really start believing that, not just thinking about it, everything starts shifting. Your focus is going to shift, your actions are going to shift, and your life shifts with it as well. The experience will come, I promise you that. The skills will be developed, you'll continue to do so. The confidence will build. All those things will fit together. All those things you want to have will fit. But it all starts with you deciding to believe in yourself before you have that permission to. That's where every successful person I've talked to starts. It's not the experience, it's with the belief. So that's my challenge to you. Decide to be the person who believes in yourself, who believes you can do. Make that decision and then move on it. Anyways, I hope this has been helpful. I hope this lands right with you. And if you want to hear more on this, let me know. Comment down below. And thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time.